All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome to episode number 2, Notes from the Fringe. We are looking deeper into Louisiana and the Fair, Volume 1. Um, and I want to start by saying my original supposition about JW Buehl may be off base. Um, the only other video I've ever done, in fact, may not be correct. The last one, because I got started on this watching the Howdy Mikowski video discussing the Louisville exposition, the St. Louis exposition of 1904. It gets confusing with the book being Louisiana and the Fair, and then the actual exposition being in St. Louis in 1904. That's why my brain is having a hard time processing that. So I apologize if I keep messing that up. But it's a fascinating book that we believe was meant to be somewhat of a add-on accompaniment to the World's Fair itself. It probably sold it there, et cetera. So Howdy Mikowski had been looking into some of the fascinating things in the book, and that led me to want to look deeper. He mentioned, I don't really have time to read through the whole thing. Would be nice if somebody did. So I'm going to take him up on that. I'm about halfway through volume 1 right now. And although I have found some interesting things, I will say this has become more of a history book report than it has been a World's Fair mystery expedition, so to speak. Now, there's a long way to go. There's 9 volumes. I'm not sure if I'm going to go through all 9 volumes directly without changing my content up a little. But for now, I'm absolutely deeply fascinated by this book. And really what's caught me more than anything else is the description of the Native Americans of the time, of the early 1500s, because JW Buehl starts volume 1 off basically discussing, the earliest Spanish settlers coming to, Florida, and then eventually trekking through mainland America, always looking for gold. In fact, that was above anything else. That was their greatest interest, and often they would go get permission from, the crown back home, and they would be promised riches, and they'd be given royal decrees and names, and this at the time, this was the most important thing that they could ever get. In fact, he goes into how amazing it was that you have a lot of these young men of Spain who were from noble families, and their lives were going to be easy and wealthy, just deciding to sell everything just so they can follow whichever explorer it was, whether it was, De Soto, or, before him, Cortez, and obviously, all of them were piggybacking off of the Italian explorer Columbus. Interestingly, only like 20 years before that. That's another takeaway that I was fascinated by, is, and I'm not able to debunk anything. When I was first reading it, I said there's got to be something here, because they really get in depth discussing, having certain encampments all across North America and in through Mexico. And it's strange when you're hearing about the diaries or the journals of an explorer in the 1920s, talking about trying to make it to certain encampments that are, in Mexico or in Western America. It just doesn't really seem to jive with the whole idea of, 1492, Columbus sails the ocean blue, then we get the Mayflower and all that stuff. It almost seems like there was kind of a lot going on, already, but the history books have chosen to choose the Columbus and the the Mayflower story above all else, and that's what we're taught as kids in school, and that's obviously what we parrot as we grow older. But again, I'm halfway through the volume, but the quick takeaways are I'm gaining a newfound respect for JW Buehl. I do not really think any longer that he was actually, hired to tell their history and cover up an existing history. The reason why is because he seems to be in awe of the already present civilizations and kingdoms, really, that were throughout America at the time. And that's what we're going to get into in this video. Sorry, there's no real big conspiratorial speculative reveals, but I can only go with the facts as they are discovered in looking deeper into this work. So I hope this is fascinating anyways, and I will keep digging in, and anybody, I'm sure I'm just starting, I probably have a pretty small audience, but everybody that watches the video, I really do appreciate it. And if you do sub, that'll like make me think people actually care and want to hear a little bit more in the future. But I don't know, I'm enjoying doing it, so I may just keep doing it anyways, even if nobody watches. But if you are watching, thank you. So let's dig in a little bit deeper here. Like I said, I do have a couple things at the beginning that come from forward that are interesting. Again, just kind of, we're trying to understand the magnificence and the size and the scope of this fair of 1904. You have to remember, this is 120 years ago. 120 years ago, they were able to achieve what they did. But anyways, let's dig into it. All right, so first and foremost, what hits you is 1,240 acres, 1,240 acres. So that sounded really big. So just to give you an idea of how big that is, the Great Pyramid of Egypt is 40 acres. Okay. A little icon is covering this here, but Disneyland, not Disney World, but Disneyland, the theme park, is 500 acres. So we have to understand that if everything is on board and there's, everything happened just the way they say it did. Our history books tell us about the fairs. Everything happened just the way they say. They constructed 1,240 acres, over two times the size of Disneyland, for a temporary 6-month fair that was going to be torn down when they were done. Now, if you have a circus-like setup with tents and it expands that far, I'm buying it. I'm understanding that that's possible. You're spreading it out. You're putting tents up. The problem is as we're diving into it, many people who are stuck or trying hard to resolve in their own minds the World's Fair mysteries, it's just trying to understand how it's possible. We know they had primitive technology and tools back then. We're talking about like they're just moving on from, trains are being laid, decades before. They've got the steamship created. Cars, automobiles are, you're starting to see them, show up, but certainly they're not a mainstay, and they aren't going to be for a while. Okay, so it's just it's kind of like you have one thing in your mind that you understand growing up about how history was in 1904, and then you see the images and the pictures of the fair and understand the technology that was developed for the fair. It just kind of blows your mind. But anyways, just a couple things I got written here. Again, the size is something that I really want you to take away from this. It's just kind of, just understand that, like why did it need to be so big? for what purpose? What was it? 1,240 acres. Again, if they're building a permanent, you know, theme park or a permanent festival that's going to last for, you know, a decade or, you know, hopefully longer, I guess I can understand the size of it. But even then, I'm still like, wow, that's just so big. And, you know, if you start to see some of the buildings, it's even more mind-boggling. But again, I don't want to ramble too much about that. Anyway, so the exhibits, buildings, and expenditures are upon. All these clippings are going to be from JW Buehl's book, Louisiana Fair. This is just volume 1 of 9 volumes. Amazing. The site of the World's Fair grew by the acquisition of tract after tract until they were included within the walls 1,240 acres. The grounds are 1.75 miles in length by 1.25 miles in width. Structure after structure was added to the original plan until the roofs and exhibit palaces covered 120 acres, 50% more than the same class of construction at Chicago. You know, again, the Chicago World's Fair is one of the most popular mind-boggling fairs, which happened 10 years before this. I mean, again, I'm from Chicago, and I can't get there. I can't stand in Chicago and then try to picture the magnitude, the magnificence of the Chicago World's Fair. You know, all lit up beautifully by Tesla and whatnot. I can't get there, and that's why these World's Fair mysteries are foremost in my mind right now. You know, it's kind of like an itch you got to scratch. I got to debunk it and move on with my life. And I'm struggling to do that. And I'm noticing that other people like Howdy Mikowski are also stuck. You know, we're trying to prove that it's BS or prove that it was possible. And right now, I think we're all stuck somewhere in the middle here. The exhibits themselves tell impressively of the world's gains since the exposition held in 1893. And these are some of the things: wireless telegraphy, wireless telephone, speech conveyed by rays of light, automobile contest, and some of the new ideas presented in practical form. Airships, an airships contest for the prize of $100,000. Okay, so I went to look up, you know, obviously what do these airships look like? So a lot of obviously look like blimps. These are both from the 1904 World's Fair. Kind of fascinating to think about an airship contest 120 years ago, flying over St. Louis, right, Missouri, and these amazing airships. You know, I think one of them went down. I forget who the actual creator of it was, but the first passenger ship in the history of the world. Again, fascinating. A couple other mind-boggling architectural wonders from the fair. You have this organ, and I could probably do a separate episode on this organ alone. The world's largest pipe organ. I mean, this thing was an absolute monstrosity. And again, you know, they didn't tear the organ down, but they did build this organ for the fair. And when you're understanding they're building the largest organ in the history of the world for this fair, it's just, you're just like, for what reason? Like, what kind of expense? I get it. You're showing it off. The organ is you know, is an amazing, you know, I guess, invention or piece at the time, but you know, the scope of these things are just mind-boggling. This giant floral clock. The big hand was 100 feet. You know, and you know the whole thing is, you know, just look at the people standing next to that clock, and look at the building in the background. You know, I think that's the architectural palace or whatever. But just, does that in any way, shape, or form look to you like a temporary structure? You know, they can show grandeur, and show off to the world that's coming to this fair without that detail. You don't have to have that type of Roman Gothic detail on 1,240 acres um, to have a great fair. And I understand that it's kind of going along with what the motive of the time was to kind of like transfer power from Europe to the USA as that, the pivotal power of the world. And in a lot of ways, again, the fairs started out in Europe and then moved over to America. And for anybody that's intrigued in the World's Fair mysteries, you can kind of see, like if there's any truth to the fact that they use the fairs as a cover to tear down already existing structures, you can kind of understand the order that they went, right? Europe, Paris, right? They got several in Paris until they're completed and done. And then when they're done with that, they're going to move into, the Eastern United States. And then, they work their way west, from Philadelphia, Chicago, and then into St. Louis, right? And then later we get, further west. But, again, we can't prove anything yet. We're just left in awe and wondering, trying to figure out what it all means. How could, early man with tool belts and chisels and stuff construct this? Even if it was temporary materials, there's just something that inside of your mind that just says, I don't think so. I don't think so. But again, we're working through it. We're trying to completely either dismantle the story or validate it. And I'm okay with either version of that. That's like, there's no big discoveries in this, but there is a lot of fascination as we move forward. Okay, so just something I said, I'll just read this out. I'm beginning to really like the writing of JW Buehl. He has an amazing way with words, and I am beginning to suspect a great mission of honesty and clarity is behind this detailed work. In fact, some additional research outside the scope of this book has led me to wonder if he was actually an early American truth seeker, rather than my earlier supposition that he may have been chosen to colorize history for the most powerful benefactors behind this 1904 fair. One clue is throughout the early part of the book when he's discussing the various Spanish explorers who are exploring mainland America, like De Soto. He tends to paint the natives as a peaceful, welcoming, and wondrous people whose biggest mistake is often being too trusting of the Spanish searchers, while at the same time colorizing the Spanish explorers as willing to chase gold and other riches above all else. And this colorization also applies to the men of the church who followed the early explorers throughout early 1500s America. It's heartbreaking to hear this 1904 version of the natives and the everlasting struggle with the approaching invaders that would become their destiny, all powered by the blessings of the church. They could give up their gods for ours, or their existence is over. And it was really that simple. Again, chilling. And I like JW Buehl's account because we are 120 years closer to the actual events. Okay, we've had less time for historians to fix things the way they like. And here's and again, what I'm starting to take JW Buehl as just the most honest person. There's several parts of the book where he is debating whether or not something went off the way he's explaining it, because he'll say, we're only left with their notes. I don't have a lot of cross-reference, so take it with a grain of sand, but here's probably what happened. That kind of writing and research leads me to believe he's trying as hard as he can to be a true historian and truthful in this manuscript, which is great, by the way, which is, I obviously prefer that to, just one video ago saying, hey, maybe this is the big time, historian writer of the day, just the man they needed to, colorize these events. But it's possible, that, they knew that the certain works he was going to be working from are just going to be, DeSoto's journals and stuff. But anyways, I don't want to get too off base because there is a lot of interesting stuff here and fascinations. A lot of it, again, with the natives that they came upon. All powered by the blessing of the church. They could give up their gods for hours, or their existence is over. And they were fine. Like, they were fine if they couldn't get you to shut their idols down and pray to the cross. You know, that's it. Men, women, and children gone. You know, for the king. You know, it's unbelievable. You put yourself in the minds of the natives and what they had to been, you know, thinking. Like, what is happening to here? JW Buehl reflects well upon the Native Americans while also painting the picture of America's earliest influencers, the European explorers, and how a nation was carved out of an existing dynasty. Just listen to Buell's description of the province of Appalachia, which is a confederation of tribes long in existence when the Europeans arrived to take all they could get their hands on for the various crowns of the Church of 1500's Europe. So I did have a little breakout here because I wanted you to kind of get, because there's the province of Appalachia there. So you can kind of see what we're talking about when I read through this JW Buell's account. You know, you can see this kind of early rudimentary map of Florida, but they're showing you Appalachia, which basically comes up into present day Florida, and then, you know, it sweeps a wide swath of territory all throughout, like the Appalachian Mountains, you know, into Alabama, you know, all the way over to the Mississippi, right? So, you know, just think of the size of this kingdom now. I mean, try now to drive through that and understand, like in a car, you know, in a car that's going to take you, you know, almost a day, right? To drive that. Now, this kingdom, this province of Appalachia was already in existence, and his description of it, you know, I had to read it a couple of times because you're just in awe. And again, I'm not saying that our present day historians don't give credit to this. I'm just saying it's, to me, you know, you hear the stories of the Mayflower and the sharing of the, you know, the turkey feast and all the Thanksgiving feast and all that, and you hear about the fights with the savages and the cowboys, and you know, it's like, especially as Americans, we have this kind of idea on what the Native Americans, what the Indians, so to speak, how they like to describe them were. And then it just, to me, you know, here we have an account of them from the actual journals of the explorers. And you were just like, holy cow, I just didn't realize how vast. And this is just one kingdom. You know, they crossed through other kingdoms to get to this kingdom. Okay, but just, you know, listen to some of us and tell me if this isn't absolutely amazing. And I like here that you get an idea on JW Buell's writing. He really is an amazing writer, and I get why he was so successful in his day. He has got an amazing way of description of using words, etc. But, you know, I'll be quiet now and let him take over. All right. Province of Appalachia, or Palache, as it is sometimes called, was undoubtedly very large, embracing a great confederation of tribes. With the Auxilla River as its eastern boundary, it appears to have extended westward to the Mississippi River and northward into the mountainous regions of Alabama and Georgia. There were chiefs, or caciques, within the region who ruled over large towns, commanded considerable armies of trained warriors, and employed as much state and ceremony at their capitals as the monarchs of Europe. So they had as much state and ceremony as the capitals, their capitals, as the monarchs of Europe. You know how much, you know, how much pomp and circumstance and ceremony was going on in Europe at the time. We get some inkling of this from the journals of the DeSoto expedition, but they do not tell us the half of the real power and splendor of this great Aboriginal confederacy, which undoubtedly surpasses that of the Iroquois in resources and extent of territory. The inhabitants were also much further advanced in the arts and refinements of life, and were less savage in disposition than the Northern Indians. They were an agricultural people living on the fruits of their industry rather than the spoils of their enemies. The stories of their greatness, their renown, and their wealth, as related to the Spaniards by the Florida natives, have not been overdrawn, except with regard to the precious metals. For while these existed among the mountains and the northern portions of the Confederacy, the people of Appalachia were not familiar with them. It is probable that the natives did not understand what the Spaniards meant when they spoke of gold and silver, but presuming that they had reference to wealth in general and desiring to propagate as well as deceive and mislead them, they colored existing facts in a manner which they saw was pleasing to their invaders. The plan met their expectations, for it led the Spaniards into the wilderness, into regions of danger and death, which finally drove the survivors back to sea. All right, and this is, what's interesting about this is this story continues to repeat as you read the accounts of the explorers. You have the Spanish explorers looking for gold, specifically looking for gold. I mean, yes, they're happy with the new knowledge and the new mapping and all that stuff that they're able to give, but it is perfectly clear that that is all they want. So you have this weird conundrum where you have the natives people, oftentimes very welcoming, like, hey, how are you? Let's trade something. And what can we do? Okay, you're moving through the territory. Good, go on. Please keep moving through. Head on out. And here's some supplies to get you through. But the Spanish, who oftentimes were not okay with that, they didn't believe them. Well, look at how grand this is. Look at how much pomp and circumstance and wealth seems to be here. Surely there has to be gold somewhere. And the irony is there really wasn't much gold in that area. It didn't seem at all to be important. So JW Buehl talks about how fascinating it is to realize that the one thing the Spanish needed more than anything was the one thing that the Native Americans truly could not give them, because they didn't really have that. He wanted to repeat what had happened down in Mexico with Cortez, where they found the mines of gold and stuff, in Peru and whatnot. So he was sure that we were going to find more. And a lot of times when he's talking to the Native Americans, further south in Florida, they are honestly telling them about, oh, we have some really wealthy, rich tribes. The province of Appalachia, these guys, I mean, they are absolutely loaded up there. They have unbelievable amounts of wealth, and you should see their kingdom. It's just amazing. So, that's translated to the Spanish explorers, and they're saying, yes, let's go get that gold. Let's go get that gold. Now, and the other part of this is when they're saying, let's go get that gold, what that means is taking machetes oftentimes in hiking through Florida wilderness, swamps, the Everglades. Just imagine it, untouched by human hands, right? For miles and miles and miles and miles. They're dealing with like serpents. They call them serpents and snakes, alligators. They've got, a lot of them have, they're nervous of the natives attacking them, which sometimes they do, because along the way they murder a lot of them if they don't accept their crosses, or they don't give them the right information. They murder them all. So it's kind of, you can see as they push further into the mainland, they're losing a lot of that kind of the goodwill that the Native Americans were showing them. And you'll throughout the book, you continue to hear this happen, where they will travel far enough that the events that they just left from, a lot of times it's massacring Native American Indians, aren't known by the new tribes that they're encountering. And almost all the time, again, the new tribes, without knowing who they are and being kind of in wonder of their horses, they've never seen a human on a horseback at this time. They've never seen this gold-plated armor, and they're like, they're in awe. So they're curious, and then time and time again, the Native Americans come and they are generous. They trade with them. They guide them through their area. They bring them to their leader. And then again and again, the Spanish explorers say, give up the gold. Tell us where the gold is. We know you're full of it. And then, okay, when I'm done with you, here comes the priest, and he wants to talk to you about this guy named Jesus. And, you should probably listen to what the priest says, or, we might just, exterminate every one of you. And again, that's where JW Buehl is like, he's enamored by the Native Americans, but he's talking about how they just continued to be too trusting. Now, of course, this does change a little bit later because, it's well known what the Spanish explorers were trying to do. But again, it's that same repeated story. Spanish explorers looking for gold. They come upon Native American areas they think are wealthy. They say, okay, where's the gold? We don't have any gold. They were not even lying. So they have a war, a battle. They kill a bunch of them, lose some men in the process, and just keep going. Like, the bravery and stuff is unbelievable of the Spanish explorers. Like to know that these guys, a lot of them came from wealth, gave it all up to go seek wealth where there isn't any, right? They're not there. This isn't even today, we don't know of the Appalachian Mountains as like a bastion for gold mining, right? That happens later out west. The gold rush is out west, and it happened, way south in Mexico. But you can see where they would think that. But anyways, it's fascinating listening to the account again and again and again of the Spanish explorers, trying to get something that the Native Americans simply cannot give them, even though the Native Americans try as hard as they can to give them everything they would take to just move on and get out of here. Let's make peace. They were all about that. But what else we got here? Okay, looks like I kind of stopped there with the presentation, because I have there's again, really that's just the theme. I'm looking into this book, and I'm halfway through, and it really is just an amazing account of the Spanish explorers, an account that I didn't really even understand. In fact, I'm trying to cross-reference a lot of this information that's coming from this book of 120 years ago. Seems to be well researched by JW Buehl with a lot of the accounts that we historically know. But I know one amazing person that I had never heard of was the one they called, hold on, make sure I have the right. Again, it's just, sorry, apologize. Okay, let's try this. Okay, sorry about that. All right, this is another amazing account. They called him the Black Warrior. And again, just reading this, I was amazed because I have not heard of this great warrior in any of my historical readings, Native Americans or whatnot, and that is a shame. And again, another kind of thing that I liked about JW Buehl is at the end of his account of Black Warrior, and somebody else we're going to talk about in a minute, he says, I really hope somebody can tell this, do more research, right? Interestingly enough, like I got onto this research after hearing Howdy talk about, hey, listen, I don't have the time to dig completely into this book. Can somebody please do it, and cover what's in there? JW Buehl does that several times that I've come across, where he says, listen, I can't get too deep into it. I've done a lot of research, but I got to press on. Can somebody please do more research and then share this man's story to, the future, to history? Because he realizes how magnificent this was. But listen to this accounting of this this leader they called Black Warrior. And again, Tuscaloosa, Alabama is where his reign was. The travelers have now entered the confines of a province called Tuscaloosa, governed by a cacique of the same name. Tuscaloosa is what they called him. A great and powerful chief whose dominion covered a large portion of the present territory of southern Alabama and Mississippi. He was not on friendly terms with the cacique of Cosa, and when he learned that the latter was in company with the Spaniards, together with a large number of his people, he became apprehensive and sent his son, a youth of 18, accompanied by a splendid retinue of officers, on an embassy of peace to the commander of the expedition. The young prince met De Soto at the border of his father's dominions and presented him with a cordial invitation from the monarch to visit his capital, which lay only 40 miles distant. Again, the same story. Okay, we know you're in the area, obviously. Let's try to make peace. You know, and even this Black Warrior is going to get burned by, you know, this amazing Black Warrior, they called him, is going to be burned by his plan. You know, again, too trusting of the Spanish explorers. The young prince met De Soto at the border of his father's dominions and presented him with a cordial invitation for the monarch himself to visit the capital, which lay only 40 miles distant. The governor was greatly rejoiced at this mark of friendship on the part of Tuscaloosa, for he dreaded his power more than any of the other chief he had yet encountered. He therefore presented the young prince and the members of the embassy with numerous presents and bade them tell the king that he would accept his invitation and march at once to his capital. When he came within 6 miles of the king's residence, in order that he might allay all apprehension on the part of the monarch and his people, De Soto halted his army and, accompanied only by his staff in rich attire, he rode forward until he came within view of the town. There, posted on a hill which overlooked a large extent of rich, undulating valley land, he found Tuscaloosa, seated on a wooden throne or stool, according to the custom of the savage monarchs of the South, surrounded by more than 100 of his chief officers, decorated with plumes and mantles of rich furs. Besides the king stood the standard bearer of the empire, carrying on the end of a spear a banner about the size of a shield, composed of dressed deerskin of a yellow color, traversed with several stripes of deep blue. This was the great ensign of the powerful emperor of Tuscaloosa, the insignia of his rank and authority, and the only military standard that the Spaniards saw during their entire journey. I mean, they had their own flag. You know, basically, this king had his own flag and he had his own kingdom. And here come the Spanish explorers looking for that gold. The celebrated chieftain who bequeathed his name to a river and to the former capital of the state of Alabama deserves more than a passing notice. According to the descriptions of the Spaniards, he was a man of extraordinary stature, being nearly 7 feet in height and well proportioned. 7 feet tall almost and well proportioned. Although extremely dark in color, so dark in fact that he was known by his people as the Black Warrior, that being the interpretation of his name, he was nevertheless remarkably handsome, with a noble front and a fine soldierly bearing. And again, you know, in describing him, it almost sounds like he could have been an African American, and we don't really know that. You know, we don't really. I don't think historically, you know, that's proven yet that there were early African Americans in America. You know, I know in South America, in Central America, you had the Olmecs and stuff, which are rumored to be, you know, African American in descent. But again, that's all speculation. But but just in describing him, that's what it appears, right? You know, extremely dark in color, so dark in fact that he was known by his people as the Black Warrior, that being the interpretation of his name. He was nevertheless remarkably handsome, with a noble front and a fine soldierly bearing. He was in appearance every inch of a king. At that time, he was about 40 years of age, in the very prime of manhood, with a countenance which, though handsome, was severe, evincing the loftiness and ferocity of his spirit, for which he was celebrated, not only in his dominion, but throughout all the confederated nations. He was broad across the shoulders, slender and well-formed at the waist, and his limbs were so perfectly rounded and well poised that, taken altogether, the Spaniards regarded him as the finest looking savage they had ever seen. His people were a tall, good-looking race, but the king arose a foot above the tallest of his officers, and this tremendous height, together with his waving plumes, made him appear a verifiable giant. And again, I almost want to break the story out, what ends up happening, to another video, because this is more a summary of the book, and it is very fascinating. Let's just, again, things go bad. Too trusting, and the De Soto always had this move where at the end of their hospitable stay, where they were, greeted and considered guests, a lot of times they would just let them stay in his own house. Him and Tuscaloosa ate every meal together. So imagine they're eating every meal together. But at the end of that, De Soto, being the cunning general that he was, decided the only way for me to guarantee my safe passage through this territory is to kidnap him. And that's what he ends up doing. He ends up telling him with no uncertain terms that you are going to escort me out of here. And he puts him on a horse that looks ridiculous, and the people know that they could tell by the way he's riding the horse that he doesn't want to be there. But again, it's such an in-depth account that I almost want to like save that. And that is going to lead me into the other fascinating person. Again, kind of like, I guess the theme of this video is basically being kind of in awe of the early Native American kingdoms and the descriptions that we get from the journals up through to JW Buehl, because you're left wondering what did these kingdoms look like? They're described as palaces a lot of times. So like in some areas he's discussing them, they have wood huts and stuff and blah blah blah, but it seems like inward, a lot of these kingdoms did literally have palaces. Like he never describes them as, again, palaces made of gold or anything, because we don't have them, or palaces made of brick. Like we can't. I was looking for those kind of things that didn't jive with known technology of the Native Americans at the time, but I couldn't really find anything to uncover there, but just the magnificence of it. Just little small clues. As much in comparing the state of affairs and the amount of pomp and circumstance around their kingdom with the same kingdoms of Europe. Like, holy cow. I mean, you realize, the magnitude of those kingdoms and what they were doing in all their stately manners and stuff. But anyways, pause one more second, because I want to make sure I pull up correctly the next breakout here. All right, here we go. This other fascinating person, historical person that I came upon, and again, JW Buehl, at the end of his description of her, says, please do more research, because I'm curious to know the truth about this great queen. And she actually has a happy ending here. That she might be one of the most amazing of all. But again, it's sad that we don't learn about her in history classes, and we have to go into this book that's 120 years old to uncover this awesome story. But again, let me jump in here. In their march across the country, the Spaniards had been repeatedly assured that the nation of Cafachiqui, lying far, Cafachiqui, let's go with that. Sorry about that. Assured that the nation of Cafachiqui, lying far towards the northeast, was governed by a beautiful queen. And this book has amazing illustrations that probably could, again, be its own video, just going through the illustrations, but you are going to get to see an illustration of her, and it's not going to disappoint. Lying far north toward the northeast was governed by a beautiful queen who lived in a fine palace. Again, fine palace she lived in, and dressed in the most splendid robes of birds, feathers, and woven cloth. It was the custom of this queen every morning to bathe in a river that flowed by the garden of her palace, and to anoint her person with certain delicious oils and perfumes extracted from plants and flowers, so that wherever she went, she diffused a fragrance that was most delightful to the senses. Her people were intelligent and progressive, living in fine houses, supplied and furnished with abundant comforts, and wearing shoes and clothing made of the finest dressed skins, while their persons were adorned with rich mantles of feathers and fabrics woven from a woody fiber resembling silk. These representations were found in a large measure to be true, for the Cafachiquians were the most civilized and cultivated people that the Spaniards encountered in all their wanderings on the continent. So they're telling you right there, these are the most wondrous people that we have come across, okay? And they are led by this beautiful queen who, like, you know, immediately you're thinking, wow, you know, like we hear so much about Cleopatra and her kingdom and her story, but we know nothing about this queen of the Cafachiqui, okay? It's a shame. And JW Buehl agrees with that. Again, another reason that you're starting to like take him at his word and understand that he truly was trying to give us, you know, 120 years later, on a historical account, at least as best that he could do. On approaching the south bank of Broad River, where it unites with the savannah, De Soto observed on the opposite shore a scene of the greatest splendor, a native town, fortified and laid out with regular streets and squares, occupied the point between the rivers, while all along the bank of the smaller stream was a great concourse of people, well dressed and orderly. On an open space or square immediately fronting the river, an army of considerable proportions was drawn up in columns and battalions composed of tall and fine-looking warriors, dressed in a uniform of cloth that glistened in the sunlight. I mean, what is this that they're wearing? Composed of a tall and fine-looking warrior, dressed in a uniform of cloth that glistened in the sunlight. Plumes of feathers waved from their long black hair, and their arms and accoutrements, consisting of bows, arrows, spears, shields, and greaves, were oiled and polished until they reflected the rays of the sun, like the steel armor of the Europeans. It was the most splendid spectacle that the Spaniards had yet seen, and they waited with impatience and some degree of apprehension for an explanation of its meaning. Presently, through an opening in the ranks of the army, the queen herself was seen approaching, borne on a palanquin, it's a little boat, shaded by a canopy of bright colored feathers. Her dress consisted of a feather kilt covering her person from the waist to the knees. On her feet were moccasins of the finest tan leather, embroidered with beads and flashing with pearls. Around her ankles, wrists, and arms, she wore broad bracelets of pure gold, and rings of the same precious metal dangling from her ears. Golden bracelets, golden earrings, while her entire person was enveloped in a robe of many colors and the finest texture, composed of feathers and silken cloth. On her hand was a circlet or crowns of pearls ornamented with plumes of white, red, and blue feathers. I love that it's white, red, and blue, right? You know, that the early American, the first American headdress. While depending from her neck and falling down over her well-rounded bosom were strings of the same glossy brilliance. Like imagine you're De Soto and looking, and here she comes. She's on this boat coming towards you, columns of warriors behind her. Already we've heard what they've described in the most glorious place, the most glorious people they've come across yet. You know, deep into the heartland of America. You know, all this the Spaniards could dimly perceive in the distance across river. As the procession drew near the bank, the queen was assisted out of the palanquin by several of her chief officers, who conducted her down a pair of wooden steps to the royal barge, which lay moored at the wharf. This was a vessel of considerable proportions, hewn out of a single large tree, and ornamented along the sides and at the stern and prow with carvings and painted characters of various devices. Over the stern was a canopy of silken cloth supported by a lance, and beneath it was spread a carpet and cushions ready to receive the beautiful person of the royal sovereign. A dozen canoemen of splendid proportions, dressed in uniform and wearing helmets of feathers on their heads, arose and respectfully poised their oars as the queen approached and took her seat in the barge. When bending their brawny arms to the task, the vessel shot out from the wharf and spun its way across the stream like a thing of beauty or a ship of the fairies. As it approached the south bank, the queen, with a single graceful movement, dropped her robe on the cushions and sprang lightly to the shore, her now almost nude person revealing all its beautiful outlines and rounded curves, ornamented with pearls that glittered like diamonds in the sunlight. Without a pause or the least show of embarrassment, she singled out De Soto as the leader of the company of strangers, and drawing near, welcomed him and his people to her country. As the governor dismounted and in an attitude of homage drew near this fairy queen, she took a heavy string of pearls from around her neck and with a single graceful movement threw it over his, indicating by this ceremony that so long as he remained her guest, there should be no distinction between them. It was indeed the act by which she raised him to the level of the throne. She presented him also with the mantles of feathers and native threads made from fibers of tree, and upon his principal officers she bestowed many gifts of rich and costly pearls. The abundance of these brilliants, which the Spaniards saw on every hand, convinced them that they had at last arrived in a country capable of satisfying their wants. For they reasoned that a land which produced pearls in such profusion must also be rich with the precious metals. But they soon learned in the intercourse with the natives that they were not familiar with those metals. I'm gonna leave it there, and then I'm gonna show you this illustration which starts this off. You get an idea on this amazing queen. And again, like how progressive, they said progressive, but you know, the queen is their ruler here. There he is, there's De Soto waiting, and there she is, you know, just in all her radiance and gloriance. You know, it's a damn shame that we don't hear more about her story. And JW Buehl agreed with that. And like all the other stories in this about their encounters with the Native Americans, it went very similarly. They had a little honeymoon period where she invited De Soto. She put all of his people up in places around the village, made sure they were taken care of. De Soto, she let stay in the palace with her. I wish we had an illustration of that palace, but she said, you can stay in that palace. And it seems as though she offered, let's just say, more than just fruits and drink. She offered herself to De Soto as well, because she was probably enamored with them. But again, after a little while, De Soto's men, again, you know, those young nobles, 20-year-old nobles that gave up their life in Spain, they gave up their life of wealth in Spain to come to look for riches. You know, they, you know, after probably several days of having their way with the native wives, they the native women, they start to steal from them. They start to question them. They start to get violent with them, and you know, wanting to know, okay, you know, where's the gold? We see them on your wrist, and we see, you know, the pearls and stuff. So she goes on to tell them that, well, yeah, well, there is abundant pearls all over. We've been pulling pearls from the rivers around here forever, you know, and so that the Spaniards liked that, but they were obviously very interested to know, okay, well, you have golden bracelets and golden earrings. And they did not like the answer for that, but it seemed to be truthful, as they said, well, yes, but we do have these, and these bracelets and these earrings are meant for our ruler. And they've come down through many, many generations, and we don't even know their origin. So that, to me, is an endlessly fascinating aside here. So we have this beautiful, amazing, progressive queen of America, let's call her, really, that is leading legions of warriors and soldiers, all completely, lined up like they are a perfect battalion. She lives in a palace, and they have some high tech, seemingly uniforms that glisten in the sunlight. The whole thing is just amazing to them. But again, the Spaniards, they cannot get past this search for gold. So just like all the other times, what ends up happening is, things are starting to go bad anyways, but, he says, hey, it's time for us to move on out of here. Thanks for your hospitality. And we realize that you're a great queen here, and we just want to make sure everybody, understands that we are your welcome guests. So we need you to escort us through your land. And obviously this was a terrible affront to the queen, and obviously her people who love their queen, to see her basically imprisoned and captured, leaving with De Soto and his men to get through the area, because above all else, De Soto cared about numero uno, which is himself, and he wasn't sure that the second they left that camp, they were not going to be attacked in great numbers by the awesome and amazing army that he had just witnessed of soldiers. So they do. They take the queen and they get through that area. And like I said, this has a happy ending. When they move into the next province or kingdom, the queen, there's a little bit of ceremony there. The new kingdom is confused as they see this queen coming, who they probably recognize and know about, with these Spanish explorers who are on horseback. Again, they've never seen anybody on horseback dressed in these these shiny silver uniforms with these broad swords and stuff, and they're confused that they come out, and there's this kind of this big, De Soto's plan is to just kind of move, peacefully into that next area and kingdom, and then probably pull the same move that he's been doing time and time again with Tuscaloosa and this queen, and throughout their entire journey into mainland America. But what happens is the queen, using all of the confusion and the the meetings, and everybody's getting together and they're trying to get off their ships and stuff, she uses all of that confusion to escape. She actually makes a break for it. She gets close to some people and they get up. She gets into the deep woods. And again, this is her land, and she's got some people with her, that because he did allow her to bring some, helpers with her, her consort or whatever. And she's able to escape. And what's great about this story, you're happy, is because after De Soto leaves, gets done with this exploration, okay, once the Spanish go through this area, it will be another 160 years before these Native Americans look upon another white man, another invader. So she escapes. And as JW Buehl says, there are rumors that, there later, when the French came, that there were many, many amazing Native Americans in that area that looked like they had Spanish descent. And how fascinating would it be that if this queen in De Soto didn't have child? So the future kingdom actually was a mix of her and the Native Americans and the Spanish explorers that came on. But I found that's a happy ending, much better ending than Tuscaloosa gets. But she lived peacefully for several more generations, and who knows what happened, because when the French arrived, things are not quite what they saw. It looks like it looks like the invaders had already started to affect the Native American population, and a lot of them were, these kingdoms were being, they shrank in size, and they would go into smaller and smaller areas, and it wasn't that vast kingdom that De Soto came upon. But anyways, I just found her endlessly fascinating, as well as so many of these others explorers. But that's kind of like my takeaway from the first half of this book, is first off, I'm extremely happy with JW Buehl's account of events. Second, I'm amazed at the grandeur and the splendor of the Native American kingdoms. And three, you can question their motives, and certainly question their tactics, but you have to be in awe of the bravery and the abilities of these Spanish explorers. I mean, many times in battles, just 100 of these explorers could take out thousands of Native Americans, because they had the technology advantage with the horseback, the broadswords, and of course the armor. And I guess sometimes you wouldn't think that. I mean, they mentioned many times, oh, this group of Native Americans had arrows that could pierce our armor, but many times they had Native Americans that they were fighting, and the Native Americans learned to actually shoot at the head. They were actually aiming for the eye sockets, for the eye holes that you can see, because they weren't able to have an effect in the armor. And you can see, the natives, when they're fighting each other and having these kind of wars, or they're hunting for big game, their arrows were fine. It got them, their blow darts and arrows, got them to that state of civilization, which was grand and wondrous, and equivalent to some of the greatest kingdoms history's ever seen. But we don't really understand too much of that. So I think I'm going to probably just leave it here. And again, I don't know if this is interesting to anybody or not. It's fascinating to me, and it's nice to be able to summarize my thoughts so far, as I dig a little bit deeper. So we're over halfway into the book now, and we'll see if there's any more interesting nuggets as we come through. And then once we finish volume 1, we may go on to volume 2, or we may find a new direction. And a lot of that will probably to depend on whether or not anybody really cares about this subject. But again, I find it endlessly fascinating, and even though I haven't debunked anything with the World's Fairs, I've learned a lot about history, and I've got an even larger respect for the early Native Americans. You just wonder what this continent looked like, how vast these kingdoms reached, how many kingdoms were there, before the 1500s, over 500 years ago. But anyways, so that's it for Notes from the Fringe, video number 2. And we will look forward to bringing you more content soon. It'll probably be a wrap up of this book. And again, I really appreciate you guys watching. Have a good one. Talk to you soon.